the expression, can't see the forest for the trees? One of the biggest challenges in scientific research is holding the forest and the trees in your mind at the same time. Whether their trees are actually chromosomes in a cell, specific experiments that reveal small pieces of a much larger puzzle, or even literal trees in a literal forest, scientists are continually toggling between the big picture and the small picture of their research, paying attention to the details of their work, but never losing sight of how those details relate to the overarching questions and concepts they're trying to understand. In this episode, molecular biologist Dr. Beata Mierzwa uses examples from her research on cell division to explain how her work as an artist and a fashion designer has helped her think about the relationship of the part to the whole, and how the snapshots she takes of chromosomes are little windows into big questions about how cells know what to do when. I'm Jocelyn, and let's get verbing.
Compare sequences. Often people in science compare sequences between, worms and humans and mice and maybe plants as well to see how much is actually very similar. So if you look at a gene, you can very often tell the similarity between it.
And I was at first really surprised by that, but then as I got to think about it, and this is where the cell division comes in, I thought there have got to be so many genes that are just devoted to cell division and how cell division happens and like the so-called basic mechanism of cell division. So in that sense, like the structures of the cell and the processes of the cell and the way they divide, I mean, if that's in common between us and a banana, then it's really not surprising that would mean we have a bunch of genes in common.
Definitely, yeah. And, there's a lot of aspects. Like when you think of it from the point of view of a cell, you have to make two out of one. So there's so many things that have to go into it. You have to control it in a way, you have to copy the DNA, you have to make sure everything is fine, you have to, segregate the chromosomes to make sure that each cell receives the correct set of DNA and things like that. So there's a lot of things that, when you look at a picture or even like a graph of it, it kind of looks pretty simple, but there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And it's amazing, all of those mechanisms that have evolved to make it as efficient and as easy as possible for the cell to divide.
Right. It becomes amazing that it ever goes right rather than that it sometimes goes wrong.
We always focus on, when it goes wrong, but it's true. There's a lot of layers to it. And it's amazing how cells actually can cope with different stresses and things like that and still make sure that the division is fine.
So I like what you said a little bit earlier. You said that nature finds elegant solutions to complex problems. And that right there, was just elegant in itself. But, it's funny because I think of evolution. I think of the processes going on in our bodies like cell division or general relativity or AOL dial-up, right? And I think we're just at the beginning as human beings towards what we will one day learn and create and all the progress we can make. And I just feel like some people, it's good to take a moment to just think on that for a second. Just silently think on, we are just at the beginning, And like nature has figured out a lot of stuff and it's had time to do that. We have to give it props to that. It's like it's had a lot of time to figure these biological machines out. But, we are just, as humans, we're kind of, I don't know. We're smart, but we're also kind of dum-dums when it comes to to what's out there and what, one day we'll be able to figure out. So
we are smart dum-dums. But it reminds me too
of it. That we are made of this. This is happening inside of us. So that's what really fascinates me. It's not something, that a human came up with, like a smart person came up with. And that's, the optimal version of how we can do it. It's like the more we dig deeper, the more we find, things that we have never even considered. So that's what really fascinates me.
Right. I think I've said this before, but I feel the same way about a lot of like nutrition studies and things like that, because, forever we're identifying these isolated components of foods and we're going like, oh, this is the compound that reduces your risk of XYZ diseases or something like that. And then we keep identifying more and more compounds, but it always seems like then the research comes back to actually, if you take that out of like the whole food, it doesn't have the same effect because there's always, no matter how many compounds we identify and how many interactions we identify, there's always just, manifold more of them that we haven't identified yet, ways that things interact with each other and affect each other. And so I really can imagine what you're saying about studying the cells in the environment of the human body being a whole other ballgame. And it's really exciting that there are starting to be some technologies to do that.
Yeah, everything is really connected. That's one of the first things I realized. That there's so many connections, and also you need to connect different scientific fields too to be able to find out things that you would never be able to see or come up with as a single person.
Right. And, physicists, we look at the body, we're like, we're just negative entropy machines. And then, the molecular biologists, they look at it a more elegant way. But, every time I get upset with my body, like, I'm running and I can't finish that last mile because I'm running out of energy, I like to take a moment and be like, you know what? This body of, that we have is just an amazing machinery, of all these things going on with just cell division itself is just, I can just sit there and just think upon it for hours. I like to think of Theseus' ship where it's like, you have, you just in a given, year, all these cells that died and cells that are replaced, are you the same person who you are? But you're constantly this emergent property of a collection of living and dying and replicating cells going over and over, and all these organs and machineries interacting, yet they don't really, know too much of the other thing, but it's all working together in a nice coherent system usually. But it's just, yeah.
So mind-boggling.
I'm getting romantic. And
it's really beautifully said.
It's part of your charm, Brad. It is. It really is. But to bring us back to some of your research, Beata, tell us a little bit. So your current research is focusing on human cell division, and how could those eventually help us to develop better cancer therapies?
Yeah, so in my current research, I study how different type of human cells divide. So this has the potential to improve cancer therapy, basically. So what that means that in our body, we have a lot of very different cell types. They have different, functions, shapes, and origins. For example, immune cells are round cells. They circulate in the bloodstream and they divide, without attaching to anything. And on the other hand, for example, we have cells in the skin or in other tissues, which is a very crowded environment. So when they have to divide, they have to round up and change the shape to make room for them to divide. And so I am trying to discover genes that are important for these cell type specific divisions. How do different types of cells divide?
And I'm amazed that this is something that I have never thought of before. I mean, I love it. I love it when that happens, when like someone poses a question or an area of study and I'm like, that seems like such an obvious thing to think about, that like, of course, like skin cells are dividing in a different environment than immune cells. And so of course that process would look different. Why did I never wonder that? Why did I never ask that when I was learning about cell division in 8th grade? Why did I never think of that? But it's such a great question. And now that I have thought of it, I want to know all the answers.
Me too. Yeah. And I feel like in the scientific literature in general, originally people have looked at the really fundamental mechanisms, like the thing that really makes cell division work no matter where or what cells and things like that. But now when you look at it a little bit deeper, it's a little bit harder, to study different types of cells, and it's a little bit more complex. But I think you need both of those. You need to understand, the universal mechanisms, but you also need to understand how everything interacts with each other and how different environments make it different.